Imagine an utterly ordinary morning. You open your eyes. But instead of sunlight, what hits you is a thick, dark blue. Outside the window, there are no streets or trees, only a wall of water thousands of meters deep. Now and then, a gigantic shadow glides past, slow and silent like a ghost ship. You get up, brew coffee, go to work, argue about rent, raise kids, pay taxes. And all of it happens on the seafloor, where one small mistake can turn an entire city into a crushed ball in seconds. The question is, if humans truly settled on the ocean floor, how would we live? And more importantly, how much would we have to change to normalize a place that was never meant to sustain human life? To answer that, I don't start with romantic dreams of a modern Atlantis. I start with the coldest thing of all: physics. Underwater, pressure rises brutally fast. Roughly every 10 meters of depth adds almost 1 atmosphere. At 100 meters, you're already under about 11 atmospheres. At 1,000 meters, about 101 atmospheres. And at 4,000 meters, where much of the real ocean floor actually lies, you're facing more than 400 atmospheres. To picture it, it's like having an entire building pressing down on every square centimeter of your body. Humans can't survive that. So, settling on the seafloor isn't about taking the human body down there and learning to live. It's about building an artificial shell that can resist the whole ocean, the way a space station resists a vacuum. The difference is that here there is no empty void, there's a heavy, ruthless liquid mass, always trying to squeeze, leak, seep, and crush everything. So what would a seafloor city look like? If you're imagining transparent glass domes from sci-fi movies, be careful. At great depth, glass is almost a suicidal idea, because any transparent material thick enough to withstand pressure becomes insanely heavy and still remains the weakest point. Windows might exist, but they'd be as small as a submarine porthole or replaced by fake window screens, where external cameras stream images inside to create the illusion of openness. In reality, the settlement would resemble a complex of modules, multiple cylindrical tubes and spherical pods connected together, because those shapes handle stress best. Instead of a vast open space, you'd have corridors, living quarters, work bays, agricultural pods, engineering compartments, medical units, linked like a body, where every segment has sealed doors that can snap shut in an instant if something goes wrong. And something going wrong wouldn't be rare. On land, a crack in a wall is a nuisance. On the seafloor, a tiny crack can be a catastrophe. Water won't flood in like in movies, it will jet in like an industrial cutting stream. The pressure difference drives the flow with extreme force, able to tear weak materials apart and propagate structural failure. That's why the #1 design philosophy of a deep-sea city isn't beauty, but modular safety. Every compartment needs pressure sensors, leak sensors, automatic sealing systems, and layers of backup protection. Not one door, but 3. Not one pump, but 2 plus a standby. Not one power source, but at least 2 independent feeds. In a place where outside repairs are as hard as a spacewalk, everything must be designed to be fault-tolerant so one failure doesn't drag the entire system down with it. But suppose we've built the shell. The next step, the thing that makes the city alive, is air. Underwater, you can't open a door and breathe. So air becomes as precious as blood. The city would need an atmosphere management system like a submarine or a space station. Oxygen must be produced, coal must be filtered, humidity must be controlled, and temperature must stay stable. You can generate oxygen through electrolysis, splitting HO into H and O, but then you must handle hydrogen, a highly flammable gas, inside a closed environment. You can also lean on biology, using plants and algae to absorb CO and release O. It sounds green, but biology is a double-edged sword. It needs light, nutrients, stability. It can overgrow, spawning mold and bacteria. And if it slips out of balance, it can make the air worse instead of better. In practice, the system would have to be a hybrid. Machines carry the main burden, while biology supports it and adds extra benefits like food and psychological comfort. Speaking of food, this is where many people think, easy, just eat seafood. But long-term settlement can't rely on tossing nets outside. The deep ocean isn't like the coast. In many areas, biomass is low, few fish, few plants. More importantly, going outside to harvest at extreme depth is like working in a constantly lethal environment, energy intensive and risky. A stable city needs closed-loop agriculture. Inside its pods, people would grow vegetables using hydroponics or aeroponics, optimized LED lighting, controlled nutrients, and water-efficient systems. Protein could come from fish raised in internal recirculating tanks, from insects, from fungi, or from microbial protein produced by bacteria and algae. It sounds strange, but under the seafloor, the definition of normal would shift. A traditional cut of beef might become a rare luxury, like an expensive vintage wine, while everyday meals revolve around hydroponic greens, closed-system fish, and fermented foods. And because life is sealed, trash isn't something you throw away, it's feedstock. Organic waste must be processed into fertilizer, coke can be reused for plants, and wastewater must be filtered and recycled. A seafloor city, to survive, would almost be forced into a brutally thorough circular economy, not out of environmental virtue, but out of necessity. Then comes energy, the factor that decides whether this is merely a station or a small civilization. On the seafloor, you don't have direct solar power, you don't have wind. You can run power cables from shore, but the farther you go, the more expensive and vulnerable they become to storms, earthquakes, or even sabotage. So the long-term solution is usually energy autonomy. And down there, one source is especially tempting: heat and chemistry. In geologically active areas, hydrothermal vents carry enormous heat. You can tap that like geothermal energy. You might also try to exploit the temperature difference between warm upper layers and cold deep water through thermal conversion systems, though efficiency and infrastructure are heavy challenges. Another option, practical but politically sensitive, is a small modular nuclear reactor. It provides steady power with low dependence on outside conditions. But in exchange, you must manage risk, maintenance, and waste in a place where evacuation is never simple. If society on the surface loses trust in that safety, the entire project could face backlash long before it becomes fully established. By this point, you can see the pattern. Settling on the seafloor isn't bringing humans underwater, it's bringing a massive technical system underwater, and then placing humans inside it. And once everything is that engineered, the next transformation is social life. Imagine living with the knowledge that beyond your wall is pressure strong enough to crush you, and there's no stepping outside for air when you're stressed. No wide parks, no sky, no horizon, limited space, narrow corridors, constant background, machine hum, artificial light, and a daily rhythm tied to technical systems. In such an environment, psychology isn't a side issue, it's part of safety. A panicked person can make the wrong move. A stressed group can spiral into conflict. And a small, isolated society can develop an internal culture so strong that it begins drifting away from surface norms. So how would humans adapt? First, circadian rhythm. Without a real sun, you must create an artificial day-night cycle through lighting. Otherwise, sleep disorders, depression, and performance decline increase. The city's light could be programmed, brightening gradually in the morning, warming in the evening, with simulated sunsets, even simulated seasons, to give people a sense of time passing. Next is spatial design. Even if it's cramped, there must be privacy. Humans need a sense of a corner that's mine, so the brain can rest. Living pods might use sound-dampening materials, quiet zones, and nature simulation plants, water sounds, sky imagery. It's ironic because you're surrounded by water, but what humans lack is human-scale nature, not the nature of crushing pressure and endless darkness. Then there's community. A small seafloor city is like a ship that never docks. You can't build a society where everyone just does whatever they want, the way you might on land. There will be procedures, discipline, and clear divisions of responsibility. But too much rigidity kills morale. So governance has to be extremely delicate, strict enough for safety, flexible enough that people don't feel imprisoned. Decisions that seem minor: who gets to work outside the hull, who has authority to shut down a system during an incident, who controls sensor data can become political power. On the seafloor, power isn't just money, it's access to life itself. Air, electricity, water, and escape routes. And then comes the painful question: if there's a major accident, where do you run? On land, if your house burns, you run into the street. On the seafloor, the street is water, so the city needs layered evacuation planning. Level 1 is isolating the damaged compartment. Level 2 is moving people into safe modules. Level 3 is boarding escape capsules or rescue submersibles that can detach and ascend. But even that ascent is not simple. Pressure differences can be dangerous unless the rescue craft maintains stable internal pressure. And once you reach the surface, you still face weather, waves, and the problem of being rescued in time. That leads to a hard conclusion. Living on the seafloor means accepting a higher baseline risk. Not the everyday risk of traffic accidents, but systemic risk. You must believe the system rarely fails, and that belief is built from technology, procedure, and culture. Now ask, why do this at all? Humans don't naturally want to move into a more dangerous place. The drivers would be economics, science, and eventually geopolitics. Economically, the seafloor holds resources, minerals, rare metals, methane hydrates, and geothermal energy. There are telecommunications cables and undersea infrastructure that needs maintenance. A seafloor city could begin as an industrial base for extraction and research, like offshore rigs or Antarctic stations on land. At first, it's a few dozen people, then a few hundred, and then services appear: medical care, small education systems, entertainment, housing. Once the infrastructure exists, the marginal cost of adding more people drops, and the story shifts from base to community. Scientifically, the deep ocean is its own universe. Strange ecosystems exist there, microbes that live off chemistry rather than sunlight, bioluminescent animals, deep carbon cycles, geology, and plate tectonics. Living down there enables continuous observation, long-term experiments, and rapid response to events like undersea earthquakes, eruptions, or ecological shifts. For humans, being present often offers advantages over visiting and leaving. But presence also impacts the environment. Even a small city emits heat, noise, and light, and carries the risk of chemical leaks. Many deep-sea organisms are extremely sensitive to light and sound. Simply lighting up a region of permanent darkness can alter behavior across an ecosystem. So environmental ethics would become part of the city's rules. Strict limits on outward lighting, maximum sound dampening, tight wastewater control, and even lights-out hours to reduce impact. Zoom out further, and seafloor settlement becomes a story of risk distribution for humanity. As climate change, disasters, war, or pandemics make the surface less stable, humans seek shelters and backups. Some imagine Mars, but Mars is far, enormously expensive, and communication is slow. The seafloor is right beneath us, still on Earth, with familiar gravity and potentially faster resupply. In that view, a seafloor city becomes a backup copy of society, a place that could maintain some industry, data, research, even store genes and seeds. But is it truly safer? The ocean has its own disasters: earthquakes, tsunamis, submarine landslides, turbidity currents. A settlement built in the wrong place could be buried, cut off, or damaged by geology we don't fully understand. That's why site selection becomes a life or death decision, like choosing where to build a major dam or a nuclear plant. Let's go deeper into location, because it dictates the entire lifestyle. If the city sits in shallower water hundreds of meters, the pressure is lower, access is easier, there may be weak natural light, and robots and support vessels can operate more conveniently. The trade-off is that shallow sites feel surface forces more strongly, face denser surface traffic, and are more exposed to collisions and pollution. If the city goes deeper thousands of meters, you avoid much surface activity, but everything becomes more expensive and technically risky. Two settlement types might emerge: a near-shore, semi-industrial, semi-tourism, offshore town, and a deep, research and extraction hub that stays mostly closed to outsiders. Tourism is a fascinating factor. Humans always crave controlled danger, climbing mountains, diving, going to space. A mid-depth underwater city could become a luxury destination. Visitors arrive in submersibles, stay a few nights, watch marine life through portholes, dine behind thick viewing panels, take photos, living on the seafloor. That creates revenue and attracts investment. But it also breeds inequality. Permanent residents live like technical workers, while tourists live like resort guests. Social tension could flare inside a tight, enclosed space, where there's nowhere to get away from each other. Now consider something most people overlook: sound. Underwater, sound travels faster and farther than in air. A seafloor city would generate constant noise pumps, fans, compressors, exterior robots, arriving vehicles. That affects marine life and humans alike. Inside sealed modules, background noise can cause long-term fatigue, so acoustic architecture becomes crucial. Machines must be designed to reduce vibration, mounted on isolators, technical zones separated from sleeping zones, and sound-absorbing materials used aggressively. A quiet pod might even exist as a mental health service, a place you go to hear silence. And under the seafloor, true silence is rare. Absolute quiet makes you hear your own heartbeat and blood flow, which can be unsettling in its own way. Then comes light, the opposite of sound. Outside is near permanent darkness. Inside is artificial illumination. Losing the sky can create a peculiar kind of sadness, not loud, but persistent. To counter it, the city might build fake nature spaces, high ceilings with sky screens, real plants, even a small indoor pond. As an intentional irony, designers would create long sight lines, even if only by making a corridor longer or a compartment wider, so the brain feels less trapped. And interestingly, in a place where you can't truly look far, humans might develop a powerful hunger for visual art, paintings, films, immersive simulations. VR on the seafloor wouldn't be a toy, it would be a psychological vitamin. Now imagine a child born there. For that child, the sky is a concept, not an experience. They learn about clouds the way they learn about dinosaurs. They know rain through videos, books, and stories. The first generation might endure because they chose it and because they remember the surface. The second generation is different. They don't compare. This is home, and that alone reshapes society. New jobs, new culture, even new jargon would form around safety, pressure, compartments, sealed doors, maintenance cycles. New rituals would appear: system check day, the anniversary of the first module expansion, the memorial for the leak incident in year X. Harsh environments tend to produce strong solidarity, but also an us and them mentality. We are the people of the deep. They are the people of the surface. At this point, the next question is, who owns the city? If a nation builds it, it can resemble a strategic outpost. If a corporation builds it, it can resemble a company town, where law is tied to contracts. If an international coalition manages it, it can resemble a large research station, with layered politics. Each model carries risks. A company city might prioritize profit over safety. A national city might be militarized and raise tensions. A coalition city might make slow decisions in emergencies. And because seafloor living demands discipline and expensive infrastructure, residents can be locked into a power system. If you don't like it, where do you go? You can't just grab a suitcase and head to a bus station. Leaving requires vehicles, schedules, pressure management, and safety. Freedom here takes a different form, freedom bound tightly to logistics. And there are real ethical questions. Should families live down there, or only trained adults? Should children be born and raised there, given the risk? In a disaster, who gets priority? Who decides when a compartment must be sealed, accepting the loss of one section to save the rest? On land, most people rarely face such questions in daily life. On the seafloor, they become part of the plan. There's also illness. In a closed environment, infectious disease can spread quickly. Mold and bacteria become top enemies because of humidity. Respiratory health, skin issues, allergies, mental strain, all are affected. The medical system must be strong, and above all capable of handling emergencies when evacuation to the surface isn't fast enough. You'd need a small operating room, medicine storage, diagnostic equipment, and generalist doctors. That implies training. Residents aren't just workers. They often need basic safety skills, first aid, and emergency response competence. A seafloor city could resemble a society where everyone must know a little, because if the system depends on a handful of specialists, that becomes a fatal weakness. So, looking at the full picture, what happens when humans settle on the ocean floor? The first thing that happens is a reversal of priorities. On land, many things are choices. On the seafloor, many things are obligations. You can't be casual about safety. You can't waste resources. You can't treat infrastructure as something you'll fix tomorrow. Life becomes more technical, more disciplined, and more system-bound. The second thing that happens is cultural change. Humans would develop a kind of deep-sea temperament, respect for procedure, strong community orientation, high sensitivity to risk, and perhaps less tolerance for irresponsibility. But at the same time, constraint can spark unusual creativity because limitation forces invention. The third thing that happens is a new relationship with Earth. Paradoxically, living beneath the ocean might make humans value the surface more, because they realize how miraculous normal is. A sky, free air, a window you can open to the wind. When you must manufacture every breath, you understand how precious breathing on land truly is. But there's another possibility. Darker than the rest, the seafloor city becomes a symbol of stratification. The wealthy buy space in the safest district, larger rooms, better light, better food. Technical laborers live in tighter compartments, closer to machinery, doing riskier work. If society doesn't control it, the deep stops being a symbol of exploration and becomes a symbol of where people are pushed to serve an extraction system. Then the dream of a modern Atlantis turns into a vast underwater factory, where humans live like gears. So what should the conclusion be? If humans ever settle on the ocean floor, it won't be a victory of romance, it will be a victory of engineering, discipline, and organization. We can do it, in the sense that we can build the shell, create the air, and feed the people. But the bigger question is, what kind of society do we want inside that shell? A clean, fair community that respects safety and the environment? Or a sealed structure, stratified and controlled by interests? The ocean doesn't care whether you're good or bad. It does one thing. It applies pressure, and that pressure will reveal human nature more clearly than almost anywhere else. Maybe the most compelling part of this vision isn't the image of an underwater city, but the test it represents. When you live in a place where nature is always trying to crush you, you realize human life isn't just existence, it's a fragile agreement between intelligence, responsibility, and trust. And if we can hold that agreement on the ocean floor, perhaps we can learn to hold it on the surface too. Because in the end, the truly frightening thing isn't deep water or pressure. The truly frightening thing is bringing our old habits, our old waste, and our old conflicts down into a place where mistakes don't get a second chance.